today I want to talk about a trilogy of books that I've just read. I've read all three books over the last 3 to 4 weeks. He's a new author to me. I discovered him from Barry Forshaw's excellent books, Brit Noir. And as I say, until I discovered this trilogy, I'd never heard of this author, because I've been writing a fair few books myself over recent years. I've had a commission. I've recently finished working on a whiskey book for my publisher Pen and Sword, which has took me the best part of 2 years. So I haven't really been keeping an eye on the scene. But the first book in this trilogy came out in 2013, as did the second book, and then the third came out in 2014. So that's not much of a gap between books, which leads me to suspect that by the time the first book was accepted and actually published, the author was nearing, at least getting towards the end of the second book in the trilogy. And as I said, I discovered him in this wonderful guide by Barry Forshaw, Brit Noir. And what I'm going to read this section out here. This is from page 111 of Barry Forshaw's. And anyone who don't know who Barry Forshaw is, you need to Google him, because he's a luminary of crime fiction. He's written books on Nordic noir, Death in a Cold Climate. That's one of his books. So he's pretty knowledgeable of crime fiction in general, and the fact that he gives such a glowing recommendation for these books in this book led me to immediately reach for my Kindle, go to the Kindle store and downloaded the first book in the trilogy, which has the rather unwieldy title of The Necessary Death of Lewis Winter. And I started reading it, and before I know it, the entire evening had gone, and I practically finished the book. I think I must have started at about 7 o'clock in the evening, and I think I finally read the last words. I stayed up until the wee hours. I think it was about 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when I finished, and immediately then I bought the second book. As soon as I finished the second book, I bought the third book. So what interested me and provoked me into reading this author was Barry Forshaw's description. What he says here is, every new crime debut is inevitably trumpeted by its publisher, though many such books fall neglected by the wayside. But every so often a book comes along which not only justifies the publisher's hyperbole, but has critics attempted to come up with new adjectives to praise it. Recent examples include Belinda Buer's Blacklands. I love Belinda Buer, I've read several of her books. Anita Locke's Blackwater Rising. I haven't read anything from Anita. I'm going to have to remedy that. Along with Malcolm Mackay's debut, The Necessary Death of Lewis Winter. The book burst upon the scene in 2013 with the impact of a hand grenade, uneasily placing the reader in the mind of a hitman. Using the familiar trappings of the crime novel, the book was still utterly original, and it was clear that the major new voice had appeared, virtually fully formed. What made the novel particularly impressive was its terrifying, laid-back, authentic toughness, surprising coming from a quiet, unassuming then 30-year-old author from Stornoway, where Mackay still lives. And as if to put paid to the notion that the second novel after a powerful debut invariably disappoints, the second book in the trilogy, Our Gunmen Say Goodbye, was, if anything, even better than its remarkable predecessor. And I would agree with that. So the three books in the trilogy are The Necessary Death of Lewis Winter, Our Gunman Says Goodbye, and The Sudden Arrival of Violence. Now, I've just read all three books. How can I set the scene here without giving too much away? Well, basically, they're written in a very Mackay's style. It's kind of unusual. It's third person, but as it's happening. So, you won't have lines like he walked across the street. The line would say, he's walking across the street. So it's an immediacy. It gives an immediacy to the reader. So the reader is sitting there watching events unfold as they unfold, and it is quite disquieting at times, particularly with some of the books, because there's a lot of violence in the books, and the violence is also treated matter-of-factly. What Mackay does very well is depict organized crime as an industry like any other, like any business. It's wonderful the way he sets it. And out of the three books, I think the second book is my favorite, basically because the ending of that book I thought was horrifying, and beautiful at the same time. And it wasn't what I was expecting to happen right up to the last page. Indeed, perhaps to the last 2 or 3 paragraphs, you're expecting things to go differently than the way they do go. And when the book ends the way it does, wow, it blows you away, you know. And it is horrific, it's horrible, it's horrifying, but it's also strangely beautiful and fitting in some ways. Enjoying a Guinness. Now the main character in the book is a hitman. They're not called hitmen in the books, they're known as gunmen, and it's Callum. He's a young hitman, or gunman rather, but he's very good at his work, but he's slow, he's methodical. He takes his time when he's given a job, you know. We want rid of so-and-so. He does the job, he does it well, but he takes his time, and it's realistic in the way it's portrayed, because when a gunman does his hit, when he does the job, then he vanishes for a week or two. He's not contacted at all by the people who set him up to do the job until he does die down. Absolutely superb books. The first book, The Necessary Death of Lewis Winter, concerns a character called Lewis Winter, who is small time, really, a small time drug dealer, working for a boss known as Shugs, who has been stepping onto the territory of the Jameson organisation. Now, the Jameson organisation are the main organisation in the entire trilogy, and I believe that I haven't read any other books by the writer Malcolm Mackay except for these 3, though that's going to be remedied pretty soon. I enjoy these books so much I'm going to start reading his other titles bloody soon. So the Jameson organisation is the organisation that Callum, our gunman from the first book, will end up working for rather reluctantly, because Callum prefers to be a freelance. He prefers to be hired out by whoever needs him at the time, and then live his own life, and perhaps only do, you know, maybe 1 or 2 jobs a year to keep time to himself. It's really realistic the way it's portrayed, and Callum is a almost a lovable character. He starts off especially as a lovable character, but the events that open the 3rd book in the series, A Sudden Arrival of Violence, shows just how dirty a character Callum really is. That opening it's very effective, you know, and it kind of turns you a bit against the character. You can't help rooting for him because you've lived through his eyes for the 2 previous novels. You've seen the way that he's trying to live a normal life, that he has his own moral code. Yes, he's a killer, but he only kills a certain type of person, and he justifies this to himself by believing that, well, these people have done wrong, they deserve their fate. Really clever books. There's also a Detective Fisher, who runs through the narrative of all 3 books. He starts off in the first one investigating the death of Lewis Winter. He's not going to get anywhere. In the second book, he's again investigating another double killing, which Callum is responsible for, but it's being seen as a murder-suicide by these 2 lowlifes who are working for Shugs. It looks like one has shot the other and then turned a gun on himself. It's all displayed matter-of-factly in the way that it's set up, and when we see Callum do the job, the way it's done. And Callum, incidentally, is only doing the job because another gunman, Frank, who is a legend and depicted very much up to this point as the best gunman there's ever been, but he's aging now, he's just had a hip replacement, and that's kind of humorous in a way to think of a gunman, a hitman, who've just had a hip replacement. You know, the books, although fantastic in their own way, the criminal world that they portray is very much seeped into real life. So the books are realistic. So Frank goes to do this hit to take out these this drug dealer, this small-time drug dealer. Turns out that the small-time drug dealer has got his friend with him, a guy known as Clueless, so that should give you some idea of his intelligence, but he goes wrong, and Frank unbelievably fails, and the two dickheads, Stuart and Clueless, get the better of him, which is why Callum is suddenly sent onto the scene to rescue him, because Frank is highly thought of by the Jameson, the leader of the Jameson organisation. So Callum has to come in and rescue him, and then the story goes from there. So Frank now has gone from being the greatest gunman that ever was, fully trusted to do a job, to suddenly becoming a liability to the Jameson organisation. And Callum, of course, then is set to sort out the Frank problem, something that he doesn't want to do because he actually likes Frank. And in fact, during a lot of the first book, Frank takes on the role of a kind of mentor to Lewis. Absolutely brilliant books. That ending of the second book, the climax of that second book, I just want to say more about that, because it's both horrific and beautiful, which is what I mentioned, and so fitting. It just makes so much sense, you know. I can't really explain what happens here without spoiling the ending of the book for you, and I don't want to do that, because, as I say, when you're reading that ending, when you're coming up, when you're on the last page, right at the beginning of the last page, you still don't. You're going to be shocked by how it ends, how that page ends, and right up perhaps to the last two paragraphs, you suddenly can't believe what's happening as it pulls the rug from underneath you. The third book, it's the inevitable story then of Callum has decided that he needs to get out of the Jameson organisation, and this then becomes a kind of redemption for him in the final section of the book, a redemption for the character, and he knows he has to put things right after suffering a devastating loss, and I won't tell you what that loss is because it's going to spoil these books. But the three books are all absolutely superb. My favourite, of course, is the second one, just because of that ending. Very, very clever ending, but every single book just drags you along. It's a cliche to say, oh, I couldn't put it down, I kept turning the pages, but that happens to be true with these books. I mean, to read a trilogy of books, and they're not small books, they're the usual kind of length, I suppose, of most crime thrillers, between 350 and 500 pages. So they're not slim volumes or anything, you know, they're not novellas, they are full-length novels, but I read all three within a matter of a month. It's left me a massive fan of the writer Malcolm Mackay, who's won several awards for his books. I think the second book, Our Gunman Says Goodbye, actually won the best Scottish crime novel of the year in 2013. It is an absolutely excellent book, but I suppose if you wanted to, you could read them in any order. If you don't necessarily have to read the first two, say, to read the third, but it does make sense to read them in order, and it does make sense to read all three, because yes, they're a trilogy, but it's kind of one long story, which is starts out, and the ending of the third book is satisfying. You know, you feel the story has come full circle. It makes perfect sense. Although, as I say, the Jameson organisation is used in other books by the author, so I don't know how it all works out in the end from that. But the first trilogy is self-contained. The Glasgow Trilogy, it's self-contained, and if I never read another one of Malcolm Mackay's books, then that story, that trilogy, still makes perfect sense to me. Although I enjoyed him so much, I am most certainly going to read more of Malcolm Mackay's books. And what can you say? You know, what better recommendation is there than that? I suppose to liken them to any other writers, I think that they are they remind me a lot of the Donald Westlake books, the Parker books, written under the pen name of Richard Stark. Although the character of Callum and the character of Parker are nothing alike, and the stories basically are nothing alike. But what is similar is the way that in the Donald Westlake Parker books, Richard Stark, then if you want to be pedantic, in the Richard Stark Parker books, the crime, the killings, it's all set out matter of fact. It's a job, it's a business, it's something you got to do. And Malcolm Mackay also portrays his characters and the events in that way. So in that sense, they are very much of a oneness, although they are totally different. There's no way that Mackay's Necessary Death of Lewis Winter, Our Gunman Says Goodbye, and A Sudden Arrival of Violence is a copy or a rip-off of the Donald Westlake Richard Stark Parker style, because it's not. The books are chalk and cheese in that respect, but they are very similar in the way that the anti-hero is presented and the stuff he does. It's business. It's just business, Okay, these guys are committing brutal murder, they're killing people, but it's just business. And there's something chilling about that. When it's done well, it is chilling. I've no doubt if I wanted to sit down and probably break the Glasgow Trilogy apart, I could find several cliches in the way the story's told, or the way the entire story, that's the full trilogy, all 3 books, and the way they're told. I could probably find several cliches, but they don't seem like cliches when you're reading them. They're so well realized. So I can't say much more than this for these books. Absolutely fantastic. I think Malcolm Mackay has now become a new favourite writer of mine, and I'm going to quickly read more of his books. But that's the Glasgow Trilogy, highly recommended by me if you like crime thrillers along the lines of Richard Stark, as I mentioned, or Elmo Leonard, where the emphasis is very much on the criminals rather than the police. Although saying that, the character of Detective Inspector Fisher in the trilogies is well realised, and he's not a stereotype in any way. Normally you've got your copper, he's a grizzled, old, cynical, alcoholic. Fisher's not. He is cynical, he is world weary, but he's far from a cliche. Perhaps it helps that he's not a main character in any of the books, although if you take his role from the entire trilogy, then he is very much a main character. In fact, he plays a big part in the last quarter of the final book in the trilogy, A Sudden Arrival of Violence. Fisher then becomes the leading character, and it provides us with a satisfying conclusion to what is a fantastic trilogy of books. So that's it, the Glasgow Trilogy by Malcolm Mackay, 3 books: The Necessary Death of Lewis Winter, Our Gunman Says Goodbye, and A Sudden Arrival of Violence. All highly, highly, highly recommended. Fantastic books. Anyway, cheers for now. Also, please, what I'd like to ask you is if you can press the subscribe button down below so that I can grow this channel. I cover a lot of different things on the channel, as well as book reviews. There are film reviews, there's whiskey reviews, there's even vinyl record reviews. I talk about gardening, which is a particular passion of mine, particularly wildlife gardening. I talk about history. So please hit that subscribe button, click the like, give me a thumbs up, and if you really want to be kind to me, then leave a comment down below. So that's it for now. This is me, Gary Dobbs, recommending the Glasgow Trilogy by Malcolm Mackay. Bye.